I call the meeting of the public hearing for the budget to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to start right in with Mr. Keegan and Mr. Bowles are going to go through the proposed school budget. So I'll turn it over to them. Thank you. Okay. Well,
Good evening and welcome. For those who don't know who I am Dan Bowles, Superintendent of Schools, and I'm here with my Associate Superintendent for Business and Finance, Mr. Donald Keegan. And what we'd like to do is walk you through the budget for the 23-24 school year. Our agenda, we're going to be looking at those things that were impacting the 23-24 budget, our strategic plan focus, estimated revenues, tax cap calculation, expenses, vehicle bond, vote and election information, and budget process timeline. So one of the things that really helped center our budget was focusing on three things that are paramount in our strategic plan, and that's graduation rate, reading proficiency, and emotional competency. Those things are paramount in our strategic plan as far as trying to make sure our students will be successful when they graduate. Some of the considerations that we had were, again, right now, everyone sees that we're in inflationary time. That's no secret. And the big problem that we're having is during COVID, there were two federal grants. One, the acronyms are CURSA and the other is ARP. The first one, the coronavirus response plan, will be ending in September of 2023. And then the American Rescue Plan, that grant will be ending in September of 2024. So the big question is things that we funded with those grants, what are things that we want to maintain and what are things that we want to maybe not do? Our economy, if you go up and down the streets, there are help wanted signs all over. So we're at full employment. We're in the process of negotiating some labor contracts and trying to balance the budget. We looked at those people that were retiring and what we could do through attrition, and we have 19 FTE positions less than we had last year.
I'm just going to comment quickly on two slides here. This chart just kind of proves the point around inflation. Last year's inflation was about 6.5% for 22 and 21 was about 7%. So we've had to absorb those costs, and that's made the budget that much more challenging. Dan mentioned the federal stimulus funds, and we were so blessed to have these funds, CURSA and ARP. As you can see from the slides, it was a significant amount of money. I'm really proud of the way the district deployed these funds toward academic assistance services for students where they had academic gaps due to COVID, to address the social emotional needs of our students. A lot of money was put into those areas. Obviously, during COVID, we spent money on PPE and a number of things to support us getting through it. But as Dan said, the biggest challenge that we had for the 23-24 budget was that there were so many really important things we were doing with this money that we wanted to preserve as many of those as possible and bring them into our general fund budget for the 23-24 school year. And so you'll see that as we move through the presentation. This chart, a little bit busy, there's a lot up there, but the bars show you our enrollment. And so everybody knows that school districts in upstate New York, we've seen declining enrollment. 10 years ago, our enrollment was over 9,000 students, and now it's just under 8,000 students. And so we like to show this chart because we want to recognize that there is declining enrollment, but There's another factor. When we look at the poverty rate within our district, our free and reduced lunch rate is up to 42%. And so I think a little bit about the teacher's job of dealing with maybe a more challenging, a more difficult job parameters. And the two lines that are missing from this chart that I think are important to emphasize that point, our special ed population hasn't gone down. If anything, it's gone up. So we are probably at the highest percentage of special ed students to our general ed population that the district's ever been in. The other factor is we are a refugee district. We have a lot of students that come to our district. Dan's going to talk more about that in the presentation, but those things all increase the degree of difficulty that our teachers are dealing with as they try to perform their instructional tasks. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dan.
The next slide. Okay, so one of the things that we spent an awful lot of time working on is SEL, or social emotional learning. With COVID happening and several other things, if you look at the news, the mental health crisis around is growing, and it continues to grow. So trying to make sure we're able to meet the needs of our students as well as our staff and families was a considerable focus for us. So we look at our total of our counselors, psychologists, social workers, and specialists. We've worked with Onondaga County and local agencies also to look at some of the professionals that we can partner with. We've partnered with, Ryan McMahon did a press conference at our high school when he was rolling out things with Liberty Resources, which is having mental health clinics in our schools. So that is a tier 3 level, as well as access and promise zone specialists. So we've been doing a lot with working with county and local health departments mental health departments to make sure that we're meeting the needs. And if you look at the last bullet there, it talks about community schools, and that's something that we're looking at doing differently because we haven't had it. And there are 2 other districts in New York State that currently have community schools partnerships, and one of the local ones is Rome City School District. So we've met with the superintendents and asked them about it. But what that's able to do is to bring services and establish them into our schools. Some districts might have, whether it be mental health services, they may have a physician on staff 2 days a week to do vision screenings, things like that, to help meet some of the needs that used to be outside the schools. There's so many needs. This COSER or BOCES can help provide the funding to be able to do that within schools. So we've this year a new curriculum for K4. We've started that new curriculum, and that is CKLA, and we're working on a pilot with our middle schools currently and looking to adopt a curriculum for them for this coming school year. With both of those programs, we've provided instructional coaches to help them through in order to improve the delivery of that instruction. And one of the things on the students that struggle, and looking at AIS, which stands for Academic Intervention Services, we've maintained the number of people that we were providing for that service, because as Mr. Keegan was saying, we've seen so many more students in need as far as they've been not up to standard where we have been in the past. So trying to make up for some of those deficits. In math, and Nick Schultz is our new math director, and talks about creating math labs where teachers can go and look at instruction and try to make sure they're improving their practice. And during that, we've partnered with the University of Rochester that has a professor that is a guru in math instruction. And we're having conversations with that person when we have the opportunity to have our teachers meet with that individual. They're piloting some new curriculum 8 through 12, as well as K2 with a fluency plan. But the bottom bullet here probably was one of the highlights of the school year. So a few board meetings ago, we had students here from a program called MathCon. We talk about those students that have deficits, but MathCon was to work with students and enhance the students on the higher end. So all of our fourth graders had an opportunity to participate in MathCon. I call it the equivalent of like a spelling bee for math. So we're looking at those students and challenging them on the higher end. And we were able to celebrate the top 10% students that scored in the top 10% here at the district office, and trying to make sure we're meeting the needs across the spectrum, because we always talk about the deficits, but we also need to pay attention to the students on the higher end. So with that, for kids in fourth grade, we're also looking to revive at the middle school level math league. We used to have middle schools compete together, and they come together. And again, you're looking at your stronger students and trying to make sure we're challenging them. So that is coming back into the mix. And we're also looking to make sure we're providing upper level courses in math for our high end students. So this graph, and I heard some people talking about, and Mr. Keegan was talking about our ENL students, is English as a new language. The students are called English language learners. So that's where ELL comes into play. North Syracuse is a suburb of Syracuse City, which tends to be a hub, but we've had more and more of an influx to the suburbs. And so as of last year, we had at least 270 students that we have to meet the needs for. There were at least 25 different languages. So one of the things that we're anticipating, given the crisis over in Europe and the Ukraine, we anticipate there will be more students eventually making their way into Syracuse City and as well as the surrounding areas. So that becomes another challenge. As we look at career and technical education, trying to make sure we're providing those career and technical skills for students that are looking to have more of a technology base. And looking at that, we are able to offer, with OCC's help, electromechanical technology program. And we're trying to work with different colleges, as well as talking to Micron about different things that we can kind of partner with and look at kind of courses for the future. This has been a hot topic, and this is the fine arts. And it's been at least 10 years since we used to have a fine arts director that has been in the district, and that has not been for that amount of time. And our marching band is actually #1 in New York State and ranked 7th nationally for large schools. And we're looking to bring back that position, because that position is currently shared between the athletic director and the fine arts is split for co-curricular with the athletic director and with our person that is our data coordinator for art and music during the day. So by having someone that's a director of fine arts, they can focus on those specific issues that have been coming up more recently. Right now, currently, we look at enrollment of courses. So whenever there are enrollment shifts, we try to balance out our staff. So we sometimes share staff from one building to the next. Guitar has been an uptick, and we've offered that because it's something that our students have asked for, and we're going to make sure that there's an addition at the junior high. Talking about increasing availability for music, one of the things that we've done is we've applied for some grants, because all students should have at least the opportunity to get started. When they're thinking about playing an instrument, and I want to decide whether I'm going to play the trumpet or the violin, but usually students have to rent an instrument or they have to purchase. We're looking at some grants where we have at least enough where students can at least learn and they're available, and so they don't have to worry about purchasing something or renting, and then see where that goes from there. We talk about new pathways in the arts, 4+1, to meet the 5th assessment. And we were named 2023 one of the best communities for music education. But some of the things that we're adding athletically, we're looking to add esports at the junior high. So for those that don't know what esports is, there are students in every single district that compete on gaming situations, and it actually is now there are college scholarships for esports as well as careers in that as well. I was brought down to the most to show what they're doing, and it's every single district around us, big schools, and they compete on the regular basis. And so we're looking to add that at the junior high level. Unified bowling, we're looking to add because we've had unified basketball, and we have students with disabilities as well as general ed students combined for a team and play other teams that are similar makeup across Section 3. The other thing that's being added in Section 3 is girls flag football as well as girls wrestling. So providing additional opportunity for female students to compete and participate. And this slide, again, safety and security. I can't say enough about safety and security. I believe it might have been 2 days at max, maybe 3, but after Uvalde, we only had SROs in our secondary schools, our middle schools and our junior high school. After Uvalde, we placed an SRO in all of our elementary schools, including NSEEP, just because of what was happening. That was something that, again, we have to pay for, but that additional safety measure is extremely valuable. Making sure we have armed SRO at large events. We've done some safety and security capital projects where we've changed, looking at locks and hardware and different things that we can improve at our buildings for safety and security. And we've worked with Armor One on ongoing training and drills for students and staff.
Good evening. So this slide talks about the district's revenues. And so you can see the tax levies, the blue portion of the slide, and the green portion is our state aid. And you can see that we kind of live and die by both of those. Those are our primary revenues. And if Dan goes to the next slide here, so for 23-24, we were really fortunate to get a very significant increase in state aid. And that's due to the state finally being able to fully fund foundation aid. Now, I've got a slide to show you on that, but so I'll come back to state aid in a moment. I wanted to point out that the district's budget is $203.2 million, or about a 7.91% increase. And I want you to know, we realize that that's a fairly large increase. And the reason for that increase is primarily due to the loss of federal funding and bringing all those federal programs, all those federal initiatives into our general fund, as many as we possibly could. The other factor that affects our budget, and you see it in our fund balance, we're pulling about $400,000 out of fund balance. So that's an increase in our revenue. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. And our building aid's up slightly due to some of the construction projects we've been doing. Dan, we'll go to the next slide. This is foundation aid. And so the long and the short story about foundation aid is that there was a lawsuit back in 2006 where some small cities in New York State sued New York State, and they won the lawsuit. And the basis of their lawsuit was that New York State was not providing state aid to schools on an equitable basis. And so the lawsuit was the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. And as a result of that lawsuit, New York State rewrote the basic state aid formula, and they called that foundation aid. They began to implement the program, and over the first couple of years, they were trying to transition to this new foundation aid. And then the economy failed in 2008. And by the time we got to 2012, the state couldn't fund foundation aid any longer. And so they stopped the ramp up of state aid. And as a result of that, at that moment in time, 1/3 of the districts were getting more than they were supposed to get. 1/3 of the districts were getting about what they were supposed to get, and 1/3 were being shortchanged. They weren't getting their share of state aid. Well, unfortunately, North Syracuse was one of those districts, and we've lost over $200 million in state aid as a result of that over the last 15 years. But we're finally getting fully funded. And so that's what you see on that chart, that we're getting our full $64 million. And let's talk about the tax cap now. So that was our state aid. The other big component of revenues is our tax levy, and we live under the tax cap. So this proposal is a tax levy at the cap. So it honors the staying at either 2% or inflation, whichever is less. And since inflation is way higher than 2%, the primary driver of this formula is that 2%. You might be wondering, if you look at the bottom right hand, you'll see our tax levy increase is 3.22%. That doesn't mean we're going over the cap. What's included in this formula is also all of the capital projects that our community has approved over the years. So, for example, Bear Road, the voters voted and they said, hey, we're willing to contribute a little bit toward Bear Road. And so that's included in this calculation. I should mention, and that for those of you who don't know this, pilot agreements, when we have a pilot agreement, you see up there pilot revenue. Pilot revenue is subtracted from the tax levy. And what happens is, if the district's going to get money on a pilot agreement, it has to pass that money on to the taxpayers in the form of a reduced levy. That's particularly relevant right now as Micron is moving into town, because there probably will be a large pilot agreement that the county negotiates with Micron. And that revenue will come to the district, and every dollar we get, we will reduce the tax levy by. So the district won't get any additional funds, but our local taxpayers will see a reduction in their taxes. We can move on. Okay, so just to illustrate how our taxes work, if you live in Cicero, Clay, or Salina, and you're in a house of $100,000 in full value, you'll pay the same amount of taxes. That'll be $2,162 or thereabouts. But what you might notice is that your tax rate is different. And that has to do with your assessed value. So some towns are at full assessment and others are not. Some are doing a better job of full assessment than others. But having said that, regardless of any of this assessment stuff, which the district has nothing to do with, your tax will be $2,162. And that's about a $67.41 increase before STAR. Moving off of revenues, let's talk about expenses now. And so what I've listed here are some of our bigger expenses. So you can see our health benefits. The district's done an amazing job managing health benefits, but unfortunately, we've seen an increase a projected increase as we head into next year. And the reason for that is really threefold. One of them is the development of a lot of specialty drugs. We spend in the market today, if you've watched the news, you see all these drug commercials. Pharmacy companies are innovating and developing drugs at a rapid rate. And as a result, there's new drugs always hitting the market that do wonderful things for people, but they're expensive. And so our employees generally take generic drugs wherever they're available. But in the current cycle of development, there's a lot of specialty drugs that will do a better job for them. And so that's raising our costs. The other factor is, whether people realize it or not, the medical industry is a very labor-intensive business, particularly when you think about the important role that nurses play. And we have a severe shortage of nurses. And as a result, the rates of pay for folks that work in the medical industry have gone up. That gets passed on to us in terms of our insurance costs. And then finally, there's a lot of new, really innovative, neat treatments, such as gene therapy, where they can do some amazing things, but it's very expensive. And the good news is they're saving lives and making all of our quality of life better, but it's expensive. Having said that, we're looking at a 10% increase in healthcare next year. Retirement costs, we're very fortunate to be part of the TRS, the Teachers Retirement System, and the ERS in New York State. Those are two incredibly well-managed, fully funded pension funds that not only protect our employees, but protect our taxpayers. And you might be wondering, how do they protect the taxpayers? Well, the way they do that is that when you think about retirement and the cost of operating a school, you're paying for the current employee's pension. The teacher that retired 5 years ago, or the bus driver that retired last year, the taxpayers are done paying for that person. These funds have taken in the money, invested it well, and they've got enough money to take care of the retirees. And that's such a critical point, because if we lived in Illinois, for example, their pension fund is I think below 40%. And so the taxpayers in Illinois are not only paying for the person who's currently working at school, but they're paying for the retirees as well. Salaries and wages, our contractual increases are about 3.35%. I just want to point out that's well below inflation. But that's what the contractual increases are. Fuel, we've, if anybody that's gassed up their car recently, it's a bit of a roller coaster. And we did the best we could to budget that. Some good news, our energy costs, our gas and electric, We are under a 3-year supply agreement that we locked in our energy costs before they got too high. So we're really benefiting right now in this cycle, and that'll carry us through next year. So that's energy. Let's flip to the next slide. This kind of just shows you, again, the green and the blue pieces of the pie, salary and benefits. I say this at every presentation because it's really true that the single most important thing we do in public education is put an adult in front of children. That's where all the meaningful work happens, is those adults standing in front of children, those teachers. And so we pride ourselves on making sure that our budget is focused on the people that are in front of our kids. And so that's the biggest pieces, salary and benefits. And we go to the next slide. I want to point out a few things on this slide. You'll notice that salaries are up 5.96. So you might say, wait a minute, you just told us in a previous slide that we're only going to be up 3.35. Why is that? Well, that's because we had people being paid for under federal grants that we brought into our budget. And that's the reason for that. You can see the benefits increase in our budget. Debt service is just increased due to the fact that we got some more capital projects coming online. And you probably noticed from the revenue slide, we have an increase in revenues as well. And then the rest of the lines, you see some increases, and a lot of that's being driven by inflation. We've done the best we can in the last couple of years to tighten up our expenditures, but it's certainly challenging in this inflationary environment. I want to just share some pain that we went through that maybe the public is not aware of. So we start the budget process in the fall, and we work really hard to analyze all of our costs and analyze all of our programs and reconcile all that back to the strategic plan. We came to the board with our assumptions in January, and in February, we presented to the board our initial budget. At that time, we had a $2.3 million deficit. So we had to close that gap. And so we felt obligated to at least tell the community the things we did. Dan mentioned the 19 positions. We went through and we looked at our class sizes, we looked at enrollment, and we felt like taking advantage of retirements, we could reduce our staff by 19 positions. We also looked really closely at our BOCES budget, and we were able to tighten up some of the items there, and we reduced some of our non-instructional items. Now, I just told you the health benefits went up. Are going up significantly. We took a real hard look at our budget, and to the extent that there was any slack in that budget, we tightened that back down because we really wanted to balance this budget. Fuel and utilities and workman's comp and equipment were all reduced to make the budget balance. And as I mentioned earlier, we're using an additional $400,000 of our savings again to balance the budget. This is our fund balance. We're allowed to have 4% or thereabouts that's what the state rule is, 4%. In our fund balance, we currently have 4.28%. That's our projection. I just want to ask each of you to just imagine if your entire savings could only be 4% of your paycheck. That's not that much money, really, and we need that for emergencies. You know, we have a lot of things happening. For example, we had the chiller went at the junior high, or a boiler goes, and we have an emergency project that we have to do. This is where we get the money from. On the next slide, you'll see we do have some reserves, but I want to be clear on what these reserves are. These reserves are money set aside for liabilities we know we have. And let me give you a specific example. If a bus driver gets hurt and goes on workman's compensation, that driver is going to have some lost wages, they're going to have some medical bills, and they may actually have some permanent disability. So what we do when that happens is we immediately put money aside. We don't know this technically. We have an agency or an outside consultant that looks at that injury and says, this is how much money you need to put aside. So we do that. We put all the money aside for all these different liabilities. And you might say, well, why do you do that? You might not have to pay that for a couple of years. Well, we don't want to be explaining to a parent that we have to reduce our teaching staff because Joe hurt himself 5 years ago. We don't want to be explaining to a taxpayer, we have to raise your taxes because Joe hurt himself 3 years ago. So we want to make sure all these liabilities are properly reserved for, and that's what those reserves are for. We've done a good job preparing for that. One of the other big things we do is our transportation, and we're at a really interesting time in transportation. So we have between 140 and 150 buses on the road at any time, and our current fleet is a blend of diesel and gasoline. Several years ago, the community and the board approved us moving from gasoline to diesel. And we've been continuously implementing a program to keep our fleet current, where we buy 12 buses every year. And that basically, our goal is to try to not have too many buses that are over 10 years old. The reality of it is we do have buses over 10 years old, but we're trying to keep our fleet reliable and cost effective to operate. And that's what this proposal does, is it allows us to buy buses that will keep our fleet in its optimal condition. It's going to cost the taxpayers $2.2 million, or about $3.21 for a $100,000 home before STAR. Now, the next slide, Dan, is going to show us we have to electrify our fleet. So by 2027, we have to stop buying gasoline buses and buy electric buses. By 2035, the whole fleet has to be electric, according to the current law. Now, what I'm here to tell you is that's probably not going to happen. We're going to do everything we can. We're going to do the best we can, but we have to be a good steward of the community's money and make sure that we don't buy too much of the new technology before it's perfected. So we're going to be buying a bus or two here or there, and we're going to be trying to experiment with it and work. We've identified some routes that we think an electric bus will work for us, and we're working on some grant money to help us buy the buses so there's no incremental cost to the community. Having said that, these purchases and maintenance of gas buses is really important, because after 2027, we might not be able to buy any more gas buses. So we've got to make sure we take care of them, that we buy the right buses, and that we get as much mileage out of that gas fleet as we possibly can, considering the difficult transition to electric we have ahead of us. So that's most of our financial side of our presentation. The vote is on the 16th, vote in election. The same as usual. You can vote if you live south of 41, you vote here. If you live north of 41, you vote at Cicero L. And if anybody has any questions about registration, Jill Herrera can help us with that. They're running a special registration event tonight. On the ballot, you will see the following propositions: the $203 million budget that we have just described to you, the vehicle proposition. There'll be 3 board seats that you can vote for. And I'm happy to report that we'll also have a proposition that will allow the voters to approve us moving the voting location from Cicero L to the high school, specifically the Michael J. Bragman Stadium, so that we don't have students and staff together. And Dan, do you want to comment at all?
Well, there's a bullet point up there that talks about a student representative on the Board of Education. So that will be on the ballot as well. And we want to get people's feedback, because many of the other districts have gone to a student that's an ex officio board member, not a voting board member, but it allows that student to collect information from the high school, junior high, other schools, and to give us feedback from a student's perspective to allow for some student voice. And there's been several other districts this year that have gone to that, and we're looking to go that direction as well.
And then finally, on the ballot for Salina residents only is our Salina library budget. And what a gem the library is. We're so lucky to have that on our Mattydale campus. And specifics of the budget are here. Once again, a very modest increase in their budget. Again, we're just lucky to have them as part of our community. We have a number of budget presentations. I should confess, we're trying something different this year. We did 2 virtual presentations. We had some attendance at those. We've done presentations at our schools where we're trying to, one of the challenges that our teachers have right now is time in the classroom, and we're trying to be respectful of their time. We used to do like in-school budget presentations during the school day for the teachers. And we found that what we want to do is create an opportunity for them to see the presentation, but not waste valuable time when they could be prepping for kids. So at the end of the day, when their day ends, we open up the school, we invite the public in, and we have a presentation. And we've done that with each of our schools. And we've done, obviously, the budget presentations along the way as we've developed the budget, and then tonight's meeting. So we're trying a couple of different things. We want to get the word out as best we can. This week, the dispatch has been delivered to all of our homes. And so that information is available to the community as well. And on our website, the package that you have that's available on the table there, that's all on our website as well for folks. So again, unless you folks have questions for Dan or myself. No. How about for the library? Any questions? If you do have any, don't hesitate to send us an email. We'd be happy to get back to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, at this time of first, before I'm going to introduce the school board candidates, but I want to thank current school board members who are here tonight, Mr. Crabtree, Mr. Maurizio, Mr. Herman, thanks for coming. And I have the 5 candidates who'll be running for 3 seats on the board. I have the names in front of me. They're given to me in alphabetical order for this meeting. That's not the order on the ballots, but it's Terry Kruger, who's not here this evening, Josh Ludden, who is here, Michael Maurizio, who is here, David Monahan, who is here, and Xavier Moody Wuzik, who is currently not here. So those are the candidates for the board, and if there are no questions, I will call this meeting adjourned. Oh, yes, sir. Okay. All right, thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.